Hello, friends. On this glorious day in drink history, we are talking whiskey. American single malt whiskey to be exact, Westland Distillery American single malt whiskey to be even more exact. And what's more, we are celebrating the release of a new and exciting Westland whiskey, Garryana. Named after Quercus Garryana, more commonly known as Oregon oak, Garryana adds an entirely new dimension to the Westland range of American single malt whiskeys. And to learn more about this new expression, my guest today is Matthew Hofmann, Master Distiller at Westland. Mr. Hofmann has quickly become an inspired voice in the whiskey industry, a trend that is certain to continue with releases as inspired as Garryana. Let's do this. This episode of the Educational Drinking Show is sponsored by Westland Distillery, which proudly makes American single malt whiskey. What is American single malt whiskey? Well, in the case of Westland, it's whiskey that is made in the tradition of Scottish single malt, but matured more in the American style. The Westland core range includes a sherry wood, peated malt, and of course the flagship American oak. And these guys have been making waves in whiskey culture, with Whiskey Magazine naming them their 2016 Craft Producer of the Year. If you haven't tried it, I highly suggest giving it a try. Good stuff. And now it is my great pleasure to share with you my interview with Matthew Hofmann, Master Distiller at Westland Distillery.
The opportunity that not just we at Westland, but everybody who's involved with us, who works with us. Anchor very much is included in that, our distributors, but also other producers. We have this opportunity right now to kind of chart the course for what American single malt whiskey looks like and is. It's a pretty magical thing when you have the ability to shape something like that. It doesn't come around very often, and as as one of the largest producers of American single malt whiskey in the country, a lot of that responsibility falls to us to make sure that we do it correctly. And frankly, we're really, really excited to do it because there's so much potential to it, much potential.
What is, just for the record, what is an American single malt?
Well, that's the tricky thing, isn't it? So part of the issue is there is no definition for American single malt. There's a definition with the TTB for malt whiskey. Mm-hmm. That's something that came out a while ago, but it doesn't match kind of the philosophy that we're trying to bring to the table, which is kind of a continuation of some of the ideas that come from Scotland. Namely, if we were to put a definition to it, it would be 100% malted barley, made in the United States, mashed, distilled, matured in the United States, matured in oak casks. So you'll notice that's, not just new casks, but also used casks in the very Scottish tradition there as well. And those would kind of be of course the product of one distillery, that being the single part. Those would be the main things that we would look at. And that's something that right now doesn't exist. You can put single malt whiskey on pretty much anything as long as the TTB is having a bad day at the labeling office. So that's something we want to change. And we think that would do a lot of good, but ultimately it would do really good for the consumer. The consumer knowing more about something and expecting a minimum standard of quality, that's a really important thing.
Now, what has your experience been thus far collaborating with other American single malt producers to elevate this category and really establish it in an official way?
Well, what we've found is bringing this up with other people is almost everybody that we've spoken to thinks exactly the same way that we are. The idea that American single malt whiskey needs defining. I mean, we're kind of at this point where we're out there. I mean, there's American single malt whiskeys now. There are, as far as we know, I think there's more than 50 producers.
Really?
Of American single malt whiskey, and they're not big, and there's only a few of us that are completely dedicated to it. But that's only going to keep growing, and our products are now going out to the world. We've got product in France, we've got product going to Japan, and there's more on its way. And we really need, at this point, to define what it is if it's going to go global. And we think it's a very important thing to define because, frankly, we have a lot of respect for single malt whiskey. I mean, obviously, from our standpoint, we do, but there's so much history to it in Scotland, and malted barley being the original grain used to make whiskey. It's very important that we treat that history with respect, and I think defining part of that category, that's part of that respect.
What has surprised you about taking this mission to elevate and establish American single malt beyond Westland and really collaborate with producers all over the country?
Yeah, I think it's when we talked to a few folks about it, frankly, I was expecting more of a fight, more of a struggle maybe, or more disagreements about some of the basic tenets of what we would view as American single malt. But a number of us getting together, we kind of had it hammered out within an hour, which was really, really surprising. There's, minor differences but all that stuff can be resolved. But the important things we're all pretty agreed upon. That really struck me as being incredible, and also demonstrative of the fact that it is time to define it. If everybody is kind of coming together and already agrees on what needs to be done and then gets excited when we talk about doing it, then I think we're not forcing the issue here. It's something that has gained its own momentum. And I'm super, super excited that it's not just coming from Westland. It is coming from other producers as well.
When you think about what success looks like in terms of establishing the American single malt category, what does success look like, and what's the roadmap look like to really get there?
Well, it's going to take a long time. I think success ultimately for the category is global recognition for it as a category, in the same way that you have global recognition for single malt Scottish whiskey or for bourbon or things like that. That will take some time. It's not unlike, the first, wineries in California who started, taking their Cabernet Sauvignons or Bordeaux style blends against the French. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. America obviously has other forms of whiskey, but for us to take on this old world style, that's kind of a big deal as a country, I think. But it's also something that will take time to educate consumers. So that's, for me, the idea of success is something where the average consumer of whiskey knows that American single malt whiskey is out there, that it exists, and that there are fantastic versions of it, and knows that it is not a minor category either, knows that it is one of the best categories of whiskey in the world.
Can you tell me a bit more about the work you're doing in collaboration with other American single malt producers to further the category? Yeah,
there's a number of things that we've been working on. A couple of which are still under wraps, because those are some really fun projects. But one of which we're super excited about is a vatted malt. This is something that, if you talk to some of the kind of the old school blenders in Scotland, they talk about trading casks on a handshake with other producers and releasing a whiskey there. And the term vatted malt, I think to my knowledge, is no longer allowed in Scotland. It has to be called a blended malt whiskey. But we're going to go by the old term again because there's no formal definition for it in the United States. And that's been really cool because, the fun thing about American single malt whiskey is that everybody is a little bit different. It has some defining features that make American single malt what it is. But the differences between one distiller and another in the United States are way bigger than the differences between the Scottish. So we are producing a whiskey with three other producers, and our whiskeys are all very different from each other. And so the result, putting those together, is incredible, and it really is. It's furthering the story of American single malt and what it can be. How different it can be and how complex it can be. So working on that is something that we're doing it right now. We hope to have the results out later this year. We'll keep everybody posted on that. That and just trying to get, the other big thing is trying to get all the single malt whiskey producers together as a unit. It's some, bourbon producers do this, even, call it small bourbon producers or craft bourbon producers, whatever you want to say there. But there's no forum for a gathering of producers of American single malt. And a lot of the things that we do in terms of not just the way that we make whiskey, which is of course totally different from bourbon, but also the way that we talk about whiskey and sell whiskey. These things are all fundamentally different from bourbon, both in price point, but also in the historical connections and, its kind of impact in the wider world of whiskey. And so we all share these concerns. And that was the other great thing about talking to these other producers, is that they also recognize that there are these things that we need to come together and discuss with some regularity, because it's time to.
You mentioned that the distilleries you're collaborating with on the vatted malt are very different. They're American single malt, but they're different than what you do here. Right. Can you elaborate on where you see the stylistic diversity happening within the American single malt category?
Yeah, sure. To me, what makes every single distillery unique in theory is you have the raw ingredients that feed it, and then the people who make it. Now in Scotland, it's much less diverse than it is in the United States, both in terms of geography and in terms of the people. The United States being what it is, you've got totally different versions of single malt whiskey popping around the country. Great case in point, Westland. This is in Seattle here. This is prime barley growing country. We've got peat bogs. We've got our own local species of oak. And we also have kind of a mindset of, creative and innovative thought that is really West Coast, really Pacific Northwest in particular. And both of those things factor into the way that we make our whiskey. And I think that's a really, really cool thing and a really powerful thing for people to witness, is you're tasting a true sense of place and the people who make it. And that's so different from if you look at something like, Santa Fe Spirits in New Mexico. They're smoking some of their malt with mesquite, which is of course a wood that grows wild down there. So why would they smoke with peat? Because they don't have it there. Well, they smoke with mesquite because that's what's true there, and that's amazing. Same thing with balcones in Texas, and then you look at the opposite side of the country, and you've got Virginia Distilling Company, who's kind of just gotten started, and they're much more traditional, I guess you could say. And to me, that's also, like, at least in the way that I think of the United States, of kind of the East Coast being a little bit more traditional, relative to the West Coast, and to see that being played out in whiskeys, it's just mind blowing to me. It's just, I think it's the coolest thing in the world. And that's part of what we want. That's the story we want to tell consumers, is like, look at this. Yeah. Like, this is America personified, put into spirits like that. It's just an incredible thing.
It's so cool. And I think when people think about words like traditional and authentic, they think sometimes limited, narrow. But I think within ideas like authentic and traditional, there's a wide range of options. There's so much opportunity for innovation and creativity without betraying those fundamental ideas that really make a category what it is. And perhaps that's the perfect segue to talk about Garryana, because that's what you guys are really, I think, looking to do as your next step in innovation and flavors. And I just, tell me about it. What is Garryana?
Yeah, absolutely. So Garryana, we're very, very excited to release this. I mean, we're very, very excited to release it. Garryana is really Westland's first kind of foray into the additional depth of what makes a true, authentic Pacific Northwest whiskey, an American single malt, but specifically the things that make it Pacific Northwest. And the first thing that's obvious about it is the Gary oak, commonly known as Oregon oak. Quercus garryana is our local species here. It only grows in the Pacific Northwest, so a little bit into southern British Columbia, down through the Puget Sound where we are here now, in western Washington, and into the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and that's it. And it's totally different as a species from from Quercus alba, which is what most people know as American oak. And this wood is something that we found like right away. We laid down some casks of this in 2011, and we've been working on it ever since. And it's been kind of a slow going process because there's only basically one or two coopers who make it, and basically until now, nobody was buying it in bulk. In fact, nobody was buying the wood, period. So really, we've finally gotten to the point where we have enough of it, and we can start pursuing this idea right now of exploration. And that's what Garryana is all about, is exploring how this wood, which very few people have ever been able to taste, the effects that it has on whiskey, exploring how that wood is interacting with the other things that makes Westland what it is. So it's going to be a series that is exploratory in nature, and that means we're going to explore one thing, and when we've done that, we're going to explore something else, which means each edition will be different and unique, and when it's gone, it's gone. But that also marks the series. That's why the series is important.
What are some of the ways that exploration will take place within the series, and where are you starting that exploration from with the first release?
So where we've started with the first release is inserting the flavor profile of the Quercus garryana wood into kind of broad spectrum Westland. So in the blend, it's not 100% Garryana. It's not even majority Garryana. It's actually about 27% Garryana casks in the blend, but it's the dominant flavor profile. But it's with all the other things that kind of make Westland at this point, which is the 5 malt recipe in new Quercus alba casks, new American oak. We've got some peated malt in there. We've got some of the just 100% pale Washington-grown malted barley that resides in old bourbon casks. And that's kind of a broad spectrum of the things that we make at this point. And so for that to kind of interact with all of those things for the first edition, that was the mindset going in there. And
then where can you take it from there? What are the options?
That's the magic of it, man.
Yeah.
It's it can go anywhere. And the idea, honestly, is that we can go wherever it kind of wants to lead us, if that makes sense. One of the kind of basic tenets of whiskey making that we try to follow is you never try to force a whiskey to do something. A whiskey will want to fit itself together in a certain way. And so there are ideas that we'd like to explore. This year we're going to be laying down a lot of malt whiskey that's made from Washington State peat, Washington State barley, into hopefully Washington State Pacific Northwest grown, Gary oak casks. And that's going to be an incredible thing. So the series is going to stretch for a long time. I mean, it's not a small thing, like hopefully forever is the idea. But, we can explore peat. I'd love to explore its interaction with both other dark flavor compounds, like what would it do with PX, and a couple of PX casts and blend. And then also on the opposite side, what will happen if you blend it with really kind of light fruity casks? How does its kind of dark, sticky influence, how does it work with all those things? So as of yet, we've got, we've already begun making Garryana 2 in terms of the blending process, but we haven't figured out exactly what story we want to tell with that one yet.
The sequel.
What,
from a flavor standpoint, can you talk me through the first release and what you take away from that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first thing that I think people notice about it is because it's cask strength. it's an 11 cask blend, but we haven't reduced it at all. So it's above 56% alcohol by volume, and I think what surprises most people is how soft it is, especially people who've had some of our Gary Oak single casks in the past, because it's a big flavor profile, and that's something that was interesting when we came to blend it. How does that big flavor profile work with other things? And that's why it's only 27%, because it's massive. So it kind of starts soft, and what we really wanted to do, and this is true for all things Westland, is get a degree of balance in there. So we've got this kind of general backdrop of the, Gary Oak flavor, which is fundamentally is molasses, coffee grounds, blackberry preserves. You got some kind of barbecue wood smoke in there and some clove, dark, sticky, spicy, that sort of thing. And then it kind of rotates. It's one of the whiskeys where I just almost beg of people just to sit down with it for half an hour, because the evolution is incredible. Because it goes through, because we put all these things in it, it starts with this rich maltiness, and then it reaches a point where you've got this, it's just screaming peat iodine, especially on the palate. And then it gets into this very, very rich, kind of like stewed yellow fruits, but always with this backdrop of that kind of sweet molassesy Gary Oak flavor. And then towards the end, I think the rest of it has kind of evaporated off, and what you're left with is just pure Gary Oak flavor, and it's just hedonistic and just delicious. It's a really fun whiskey. It really is.
Has there been any experimentation with cocktail application, or do you envision this being more of a pure sipping whiskey?
I mean, I think with all of our whiskeys, they're always made to be pure sipping whiskeys. Is somebody going to take this and probably try to put a cocktail spin on it? Yeah, sure. But I don't, we haven't made that with it in mind. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of part of I think the fun thing with cocktails generally is if you just make the best whiskey you possibly can, and then you see what, the creative spin that people in the bartending world can put on it. Mm-hmm. And then neither of you are sacrificing anything. So I don't know. I mean, with its flavor profile, with the Gary Oak flavor profile, I could see that just being a really great tool in a lot of things. But it's also, to get the full experience, to get that full element of balance, it's best, appreciated neat.
What happens if you go 100% Gary Oak?
You don't ever want to go 100% Gary Oak. I mean, no, we released a few. We released a few, single casks for it, and they're so strong. I mean, it's coming back to that balance thing. We want to make whiskeys with balance, but with these casks, the first ones that we released, that was kind of an exception to the rule, because of how important, frankly, it is to release these whiskeys that talked about Oregon oak. Because as far as we know, these were the first whiskeys that anybody had ever released that were 100% matured in Gary Oak, Oregon oak. That's extraordinary. So to be able to put that out as is was important. So it just kind of depends on the cask, and that's something that we're also pursuing. This is a bit of a spoiler alert for what you'll see coming in probably 2017, 2018. But while we've got this interaction with the Gary Oak and the rest of what makes Westland in Garryana, we will also pursue a study of Gary Oak on its own, and how things can be pulled apart and isolated and analyzed, and see where the flavor comes from. We've secured, again, part of the little spoiler here, but we've secured some 3-year-old air-dried wood for Gary Oak. We've received 5-year air-dried wood. We've received 7-year air-dried wood. That's all being assembled into casks. And what does that difference in air drying do? Mm-hmm. We're gonna learn all that stuff. We've now secured green logs, so we can do whatever we want with it from the point where the tree comes down. and we're going to go into all of that stuff for sure.
Man, it's so cool.
It is. It's really something. I mean, the mind blowing thing is how rare of an opportunity this is. You know, how in the history of, you know, of beverage, alcohol, wine, spirits, how often is it basically a new oak species discovered? You know, it's been around, you know, using oak for things like this, been around for a long time. And for this one to just kind of be sitting here right under our noses, and also for it to be really, really good is incredible. And we've really made a huge commitment to it because we see the potential. And just the most sad thing about Gary Oak is we were able to secure all of that aged wood, that 3-year, that 5-year, that 7-year aged wood, because nobody else wanted it. Which is, you know, I mean, I know why they didn't, because it's more expensive to use than Quercus alba, and it's really powerful for winemakers, but it just, you know, it just clicks for whiskey makers. So it's something that we recognize how good of an opportunity we've got here.
It's so cool that you guys are taking that approach, because I think the obvious approach would be just use it like you would use any whiskey barrel. But there's so many variables, and who knows how those variables will impact a whiskey until you try it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is one thing to just take them and use it, but if it's not studied, if it's not explained, and if it's not kind of brought into the world of whiskey, the world of whiskey is a big place, and it's a place that's been around for a long time. And that's why I think the Garryana series is so important, is because it's you know, the Gary Oak's kind of entrance into this world. You know, it's meeting all these other things that we know exist. There are these things that exist within the Westland ecosystem, the peated malt, the 5 malt recipe. Okay, all right, Gary Oak, officially welcome to the party. You know, that's I think that's a really cool thing for consumers to get to experience.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from your peers, other distillers, maybe media that has had an early glimpse at this?
Everybody has been really, really, really excited about it. It's something where, because of the nature of the series, you know, and this is true, I think, actually broadly for American single malt, we can just dive in and follow a path and not have to worry about it looking like something else. And that in and of itself is a rare thing. And as I was just saying, like, that's, I think, one of the great advantages of American single malt whiskey as a category, is that because we have no history, we can just go and just do all of the best things, and just dive in at 100%. And for people to get the opportunity to witness that, and other producers who won't, you know, I know other distillers who will be at other distilleries, especially in Scotland or wherever, and they, you know, they'd love to have an opportunity to do something like this, but it just doesn't fit. So everybody I've talked to is really, really excited about it. It's also, I mean, both philosophically, but it's also really yummy. So, which is really important too.
And does the timing differ substantially from how you would normally use oak in maturation of whiskey? Does the maturation happen quicker, slower?
No, it's kind of, well, it's been interesting, and that's part of what we'll eventually, you know, explore there too, because we saw initially, when we started filling into these casks in 2011, this huge influx of oak flavor. I mean, it was it was ridiculous, and we were just sitting there going, like, what happened here? And then it all, you know, it kind of leveled out, and this is true for all maturation. It kind of goes in cycles or waves, and so you'd see these swings back and forth between extraction and you know, kind of the softening and oxidation and things like that. So, but it's largely followed the same general pattern as we see with new American oak, but of course the flavor profiles are different, and we've seen how it interacts with other things. Like, what's been really interesting, I think, is to compare it with something like a sherry cask, for example. We found that sherry casks, if they're big in flavor, if you get a lot of extraction from a sherry cask, it tends to not want to play as nicely with the other flavor profiles that are in a blend, things that come from the malt or from the fermentation. The great thing about this Gary Oak flavor profile is, even though it's big and assertive, it still allows for the other things to play along, which is, from a blending perspective, just amazing. It's perfect. But it just also makes for, I think, much more interesting whiskey.
Absolutely. And then going back to American single malt for a moment, again, I think it's so cool that Westland has taken such a role of leadership in trying to rally other producers, collaborating and bringing this American single malt category to life. At the same time, you guys have kind of had a big year just here at Westland and what you've done to really get the attention of the industry, earn that credibility around all these innovative things that you're doing. Can you kind of fill the audience in on what has happened over the last year, some of these big awards, and your experience being kind of at the center of it all?
Yeah, sure. There's been a number of things. You're right. We have had a good year. From 2015 into 2016, we've all three of the core expressions have won a competition. Our flagship whiskey, just got a 96-point score and a chairman's trophy at the Ultimate Beverage Challenge, which I think was pretty incredible. But Sherrywood is San Francisco World Spirits Competition's Craft Whiskey of the Year. Peated was the American Distilling Institute's Whiskey of the Year. There's been a number of, double golds and 98 points, 96 points, all that other stuff, and that's great. But the other thing that we're seeing here is there's a couple of other big things that are really important, and I'm going to say these as not because they're personal accolades. This is not to pat myself on the back in any way, because it's, to me, those personal accolades are really about the team here, because I don't get that without anybody helping me out. So, one of the things is this kind of Star Chefs organization, this Rising Star Award, which is normally in the culinary world. I'm only the second distiller to receive one of these awards. The other thing is the 30 under 30, the Forbes 30 under 30 award, which is great. And what's interesting about those is those two things are two different ends of the spectrum. You've got something that's producer and food oriented, and you've got something that's business oriented. And that, I think, is really, really telling, because what that says is that what we're doing here in terms of our approach to malt whiskey making, when it comes to using local species of barley and our interaction with organizations like the Bread Lab, using local peat, using a local species of oak, and also being committed to maintaining and sustaining those systems, that's something that gets people in the food industry excited, but it's also something that's resonating with people in the world of business. And that, I think, that's the holy grail right there, isn't it? I mean, something where you're doing good, you're producing something that's economically viable, but it's also something that still tastes really good and is also good for the world around it. I mean, that's kind of it. That's what we're shooting for. And I think, we get awards, like we just received the best craft whiskey distiller in the world award from Whiskey Magazine, which was incredible. And I think that's all part of it too. I mean, it's not just about the products, and it's great that they receive the high scores, but it's also about the philosophy. That's the really important thing. And if we're honest, that was the thing that we didn't know that people would get. That's the hard part, because we are here, we're taking a step into unknown territory. We're not copying Scotland with the things that we're doing. And we're going down this road, especially in terms of areas of sustainability and economic viability for farmers. Like, this stuff is part of a broader movement that's happening outside of the world of beverage. It's a big thing that's happening in food right now. And we didn't know if our vision for that would be met with, kind words and acknowledgement, but it has. And I think that's the best part about all of these awards. It has nothing to do with, great, we made a whiskey that does this. It's this recognition that our idea and that our philosophy is not just sound, but that other people understand it and get it, and the world is ready for things like this that we're doing.
Well, I mean, I've been here for a couple of days doing interviews, and I specifically wanted to interview you last because I wanted to see what I could learn and take away from all the other interviews. And a common theme through all the interviews has been a massive sense of pride for the distilling movement that's taken place in the Pacific Northwest only over the last couple of years. It wasn't too long ago. It was, you had no distilleries here in just a short amount of time. A stat that bartenders love to throw out is apparently there's more distilleries per capita in Washington than anywhere else in the United States. And that's so huge. And, to see that there's such a massive sense of pride around Washington distilleries, and at the same time to see how much Westland has made the Pacific Northwest a priority in the creative vision of the whiskeys that you create. And, to see that there's a handful of really great world-class, more than a handful. I mean, there's just so many great distilleries up here now. It's kind of mind-boggling, and that you guys can play a role in that. It's just so cool to watch.
Yeah, it's an incredible opportunity that we have, and for us, letting the world that we come from, the Pacific Northwest, into our whiskey, we think is the way to produce the most, the truest form of whiskey, to make something that's authentic, even if it doesn't look like what is expected to be out there. It might take longer for people to get it, but it's the truth. And it's, I think that's when we talk about businesses that'll hopefully be around for 100 years, like that's what we want to be. We don't want to be here for 20 years and make a quick buck and then we're out. That's not what this is about. And that's true for so many other distilleries here too, reflecting the sense of place. And I think because of that, you have a lot of pride from people who enjoy it, because there are snake oil salesmen out there, but there's also a ton of good people.
Well, congratulations. I know the world's going to be very excited for this newest Westland release, Garryana, as well as all of the inspired expressions that follow it. Thank you so much for your time and ideas. And I know that this will not be your last time on this fair podcast. So until next time, Godspeed and cheers.
Thanks very much.